Hi, I'm Reverend Wendy Craig-Purcell here at the Unity Center in San Diego. Thank you so much for watching today. If you'd like to support the work that we do here, please consider making a contribution. Go to our website. It's easy to do. Thank you in advance for that contribution. To carve out our lives, to reshape our soul, to be all that we are meant to be. I think that is the gift of the spiritual quest and the gift of the spiritual journey, but that gift comes with some work. We're unpacking ourselves, so to speak, dealing with the many layers that we've accumulated over life's experiences and challenges that sometimes cover up the natural light and beauty and radiance that we're born with. And so there is a process, and I believe that the spiritual journey, the spiritual path, the quest helps us to let go of all that stands in the way of that spark of the divine that resides within each and every one of us. And there's not just one way to do that. There's not just one religion or tradition or path that can help produce the same result, if you will. What matters is that we find one that works for us, that we resonate with, and then we work it. And we work it not just in community with our members of our spiritual family and folks that seem to be more like us, but that we work it in the nitty-gritty of our lives. To me, the embodying of these teachings, the embodying of God consciousness, is how does it look in the tough spots of my life? How does it look in the difficult relationships or in the moments of despair or fear when everything seems to be falling apart? And in Unity, we have teachings that help us to find a way through that. And I believe that that's true of any of the world's spiritual traditions, that the teachings, when accurately applied, help the student to create a life that is an instrument of beauty and light. A Sunday school teacher was teaching her class of 6- and 7-year-olds the 10 Commandments. And if you grew up in the Christian faith, or perhaps you grew up in the Jewish faith, you learned the 10 Commandments. And so she was teaching her class the 10 Commandments, and she had just finished explaining the commandment, "Thou shalt honor thy father and mother." And then she posed a question to her students. She said, "And is there a commandment that teaches how we should be with our brothers and sisters?" And one little boy piped up rather quickly. He was the oldest of about 4 or 5 kids in his family, and he said, "Absolutely, the commandment that says, 'Thou shalt not kill.'" It's a start, isn't it? It's a start, but it only goes so far. It only goes so far. The teachings can be applied on so many different levels, There's the learning what the teaching is, then there's the doing of the teaching, and then there is the embodiment of the teaching. And we don't have to look any further than Jesus' teachings to see the evolution of spiritual practice. He contrasted so much with the Old Testament teaching that was very much about what you should and should not do. Let me read to you the 10 Commandments. As I was going through this lesson myself, I couldn't help but remember my days in the Lutheran church. And my family went to church pretty much every Sunday, and we learned in Sunday school the 10 Commandments. And I remember my parents wanted us to memorize them, and they were the ones that were in the King James Version with all the these and the thous. "Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Honor thy father and mother. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, wife, manservant." And so it's very specific, isn't it? And it's all about mostly about what you should not do. Very, very literal. And I'm not suggesting that there's not a lot of wisdom in those words, but then listen to the feeling and the tone and the flavor of Jesus' words. His teachings really deal on the level of embodiment, on the level of being. Think of the Sermon on the Mount, some of his best teaching. Think of the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is a kingdom of God. Such a contrast, right? Thou shalt not, followed by Jesus saying, blessed are you if you embody, blessed are you if you become these things. And he didn't just do it with the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes. He also talked about other teachings in the Old Testament and took them into a much deeper level. And that's what we're talking about today. It's one thing to know the teachings. It's another thing to challenge ourselves to practice them not only on the level of behavior, but on the level of beingness. And why is that important? Because the power of what we are is the strongest vibrational power that we have, even stronger than what we do. And I'll get to that a little bit later in the lesson. He continued to contrast his teaching, which was radical then, to the Old Testament teaching. You have heard that it was said to the people of long ago, do not murder. He's referring to the Ten Commandments. And anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. So from do not kill, right, to even if you're angry, which is an internal feeling, right, that you will be subject to judgment. Now, I need to pause here for a moment, because what do you think he meant by judgment? I think he meant that there will be a consequence that you will experience, not a judgment day, that's a church teaching, but there will be a consequence for whatever we hold inside. And if we hold inside anger against our brother, and hold it without resolving it, without trying to understand it, without trying to dissolve it, without trying to heal it, if we hold it inside, we will be subject to judgment, not judgment by another, but consequence, a natural consequence. When we are holding a toxic emotion and toxic feeling, we are the ones that are going to be impacted by that. You have heard that it was said, do not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the cheek, turn to him the other also. Again and again, he's saying, okay, I know you know these things. You learned these things as I did. It was part of our teaching. You know these things, but I'm telling you that there is a much deeper and probably more rigorous way that they are to be applied and to be practiced on the deeper being level. Because it's not just enough to work on the behavioral level. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbors and hate your enemy, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Where is the reward, he said elsewhere, if you only love those that love you? That's an easy thing to do. It takes no effort to do that, no spiritual might, no spiritual deep capacity to love those who love us. But he tells us, that's great, but the real growth comes when you go deeper, when you embody these teachings at a level that causes you maybe to do some internal questioning and struggling to find your way to love, to find your way to understanding. There comes a time in our spiritual study where I think it is true we can say we haven't really heard anything new.
There comes a time when we have read many books, we've listened to many teachers, we have heard many sermons, and there comes a time where we can say, I get that, I understand that, and I'm doing a pretty decent job of practicing it some of the time or most of the time. It then becomes less about, are we hearing something new? And becomes much more about, how is it making us new inside? How are we hearing it in a deeper way and challenging ourselves to practice it in a deeper way, a more consistent way? I think back to my first of 3 times of being with a group of people that were doing some work with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And the very first time was back in about 1990. We were in Dharamsala, India, with him and with a group of people that we had invited to be with us through the Association for Global New Thought. And when I came back, many in our community and many of my friends asked me, what was it like to meet the Dalai Lama? And I found myself needing to be somewhat careful in how I responded to that question, because it was an honor to spend time in a rather intimate setting with him over a period of days. And it was an important experience. I didn't hear, and I mean this with humility, I didn't hear anything from him that I had not heard before. I did not hear anything from him really that I had not also kind of taught in one way or another. But, and this is an important but, it landed in me and on me in a much deeper and more profound way, not because of the words, but because of his embodiment, his vibration, if you will, his aura, his presence amplified that message in a way and to a degree that it had so much more oomph. It had so much more staying power, if you will. I remember in my years in ministerial school, I spent quite a bit of time reading and studying the Transcendentalists. And I loved Thoreau and I loved Emerson. And one of the lines of one of Emerson's essays, he has a line that says, "What you are speaks so loudly or thunders so loudly, I can't hear what you're saying." And that idea stays with me because it speaks to this very concept of our words only go so far. Our actions, in a way, only go so far. What we are is what is really powerful. And this is why the deeper work kind of polishes us up and allows us to be that much more of the God-created being, so that we can have a positive influence on the people around us, and so that at the level of how we are vibrating, what we are at our very core attracts to us greater good, greater opportunity, greater joy. There's a story about St. Francis of Assisi being with his monks in the monastery, and his young monks were eager to go into town and to teach the Word of God, to teach about God that they were learning and experiencing more of through St. Francis. And they so wanted to go into town and teach. And one day St. Francis said, yes, we will do that. And if you've ever been to the town of Assisi, you know how beautiful it is, and the winding, narrow streets. And so St. Francis and the monks went into town, and they wandered the streets, and they did what they needed to do. They shopped, and they spent the day wandering through the streets and came back to the monastery. And after a while, one of the boldest of the monks said to St. Francis, "I don't understand. You promised that when we went into town today, we would have an opportunity to teach the Word of God. And we didn't do that. We just wandered the streets and picked up things that we needed. We did not do that." And here is what St. Francis is said to have replied. "My brothers, we have been teaching all the time we were walking. We have been teaching in the streets and in the marketplace and in the shop and in the rain. We have been observed. We have been observed. Our behavior was marked, and so we delivered a morning sermon for God. My sons, it is of no use that we walk anywhere to teach unless we teach as we walk. My sons, it is of no use that we walk anywhere to teach unless we teach as we walk. He was speaking of being the teaching, being the message. We could take the teaching of gratitude for a moment, and we could say that there is an evolution of the practice of gratitude, right? And probably all of us can remember as kids being taught one part of that practice under the banner of civility or under the banner of good manners, that we were to say please and thank you. Please as a request for something and thank you when something was done. Very outer, right? I'm not saying abandon that, but we were taught the outer practice of gratitude. And then maybe as we got older, we embodied that a little bit deeper and we took it a little bit further. And we not only said thank you, but we showed our gratitude maybe with a note or something like that to someone. But then there's an even deeper expression of that. It includes those things. It transcends and includes those things. But it also transcends and becomes the embodiment of gratitude. That we carry the feeling of gratitude just because we can. Not because of anything external that has happened, but because it is how we choose to be. We choose to be the teaching. It's the difference in the practice of peace or nonviolence, for that matter. Probably most of us have learned not to use our hands to hit someone when we don't get our way. Little children often have to be taught that, right? But there comes a time when we stop that outer behavior of lashing out in a physical way, and then we use our words. And sometimes the words we use can be pretty darn harsh as well. But then there comes a time when we begin to soften into an even deeper practice of that. What are our thoughts? How safe is it for people to walk through the corridors of our mind? How judgmental are we? And if we catch ourselves in our mind having a very critical energy or judgmental feeling or thought about another, do we catch ourselves to notice? Just that act of catching ourselves and noticing is a sign of spiritual growth. And then when we catch ourselves and we notice, we transform that. We choose a different energy, a different thought. We try to behold, as we might say in unity, the Christ in them, or behold the God in them, or behold them as a child that maybe is hurt or confused or frightened. So there's such a deepening into the teachings. And why is a practice of deepening important? I think it's important because we create, we attract, and we draw according to what we are being, even more than what we do. Let me repeat that. Because we create, attract, and draw according to what we are, how we are being, even more than what we do. Jesus said, make a tree good and its fruit will be good. Make a tree bad and its fruit will be bad. For a tree will be recognized by its fruit. He's not talking about trees. He's talking about our consciousness. The purer or more elevated or higher our consciousness is, the better the fruits or the results of our life experience, whether that is our results in our relationships or our results in the well-being, our physical well-being, or the results in our finances. There's no separation. Who and what we are that all over the place. Our behavior may change and we may be able to fake it, but who and what we really are in consciousness shows up in all areas of our lives. We can't fake it, but we can work to shine it up. We can work to remove that which camouflages it. The power of attraction is much stronger at the level of being than at the level of doing. Being must include the doing, but the doing doesn't always include the consummate and congruent being. And so in closing, what's required of us to continue to go deeper and to be the teaching as best we can, I think it's three simple things. We have to be willing. We have to want to. If we're not willing, if we don't want to, nothing's going to change. So we have to be willing. And then we have to be aware. And awareness sometimes is challenging because we see things we don't want to see. We notice things about ourselves that we wish weren't so. It's like the little boy who was learning to improve his spelling and was working on the spelling of the word conscious and conscience. And he was also wanting to make sure that he understood the meaning. And his mom said, do you understand the difference? And he said, well, yeah, Mom, I think I do. Conscious is when you're aware of something, and conscience is when you wish you weren't. So it's that awareness, right? And it's wonderful when we catch ourselves doing something good, and it's valuable when we catch ourselves where we've fallen short of our own mark that we put for ourselves. But we can't change it. You've heard me say that for decades. We can't change anything if we don't see it first. So the willingness to see, the awareness of paying attention to what we see, and then thirdly, the act of self-correction. And I used to think that part was really hard, but the more that I'm in this work and the more I try to practice myself, the more I have come to experience that if I'm willing, which I am, and if I am aware, which I try to be, and I bet you do too, that the self-correction almost happens, at least partially, automatically, because we know so much more than what we consistently do. You know these teachings more than you are able to consistently practice them, or currently consistently practicing them, and that's true of me too. So it's not a lack of knowledge, it's a lack sometimes of awareness or catching ourselves, and then making that flip, making that change. So in closing, notice how you be. Notice how you be even more than what you do. Namaste.